So my name is Noam Moshe. I am the team lead for Claroty Team 82 and the lead vulnerability researcher.
And Noam, thanks for taking the time to speak to me. We're here at the Black Hat briefings in Las Vegas. How's the show been for you?
Oof, it's been busy. I've met a lot of cool people. I love attending Black Hat and speaking at Black Hat.
Yeah.
It's an awesome community, and I'm looking forward to DEF CON, which is similar but with a twist.
Are you doing a talk at DEF CON?
Yeah, also on the Access research.
So really interesting research that you published into remotely exploitable vulnerabilities in access IP cameras.
We do what we call XIoT protection or CPS protection.
Yeah.
Essentially anything that is not a Windows computer. And we do see a lot of Windows. I can tell you, like when you're talking about engineering workstations and stuff, you see a lot of Windows, especially in medical. But essentially we try and take a look at any sort of device that could be used by attackers to cause some physical damage and attack the CPS ecosystem. And specifically in Access, we have it in both ways. First of all, it's an IoT device. We see it a lot in a lot of sensitive information. Of course, it can be used for espionage. See it more and more in the Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, IO control, attackers taking a look at IoT devices as a pivot point and to stay undetected in networks. So it is very present in the world of CPS and critical infrastructure. And in addition to that, it's a classic IoT device, a machine and half black box that you are unaware what's going on in it, what's sitting on it, and how it can be used to attack your networks.
Historically, the InfoSec industry has been very focused on Windows software and Windows-dominated networks, but as you point out, there are more and more devices, non-traditional endpoints that are showing up in these environments, and many of them are not running Windows. They're running embedded Linux or what have you.
Exactly. They are the underbelly of our networks. They're hidden, unprotected, black boxes. We have no idea what's going on. And many times attackers are using these devices to stay undetected in the networks and move laterally. I believe it's one of the more interesting attack surfaces that we see being exploited more and more today.
Now with Access, we know like the KV botnet was compromising access was compromising access IP cameras. This is the one that was used by Volt Typhoon or Salt Typhoon, I can't remember which one, for attacks on communications infrastructure and stuff like that. Is that just a reflection of the fact that access cameras are pretty common? There are a lot of them out there in sensitive environments?
Exactly. Access is a leading brand in the world of IP camera and video surveillance. And we do see less and less players in that field. More countries, Western countries, began banning usage of devices in government institution, medical, all of that sort. And this leaves the consumer with less options to pick from. And this is why we see such a big player such as Access being heavily used in various industries.
Swedish companies, solidly Western European, and obviously make good hardware.
Very big presence in the United States. From the servers we saw on the internet, of one installation type, 6500, 4,000 were in the United States.
Wow.
So we can see them dominating the United States.
So talk a little bit about what got you dig into the Access software and look for vulnerabilities. What was it that prompted that?
So in general, we try and take apart heavily used devices could be exploited by attackers. And this was what led us down to the Access rabbit hole. More specifically, one of the things I love the most when researching and finding vulnerabilities in IoT devices is looking for centralized servers, essentially one server that controls a whole fleet of devices. Because by exploiting this one specific server, you are able to pivot, move laterally, and basically take control over a huge fleet, which could be composed of thousands of tens of thousands of devices. And this is exactly the example. We managed to uncover vulnerabilities in the Access.remoting proprietary protocol that is used by Access servers. These servers manage Access cameras and allow you to basically control your fleet, change configuration, modify firmware settings, backups, and of course, The main use case is consuming video feed. And by uncovering the vulnerabilities in these centralized servers, an attacker is able to pivot to all the managed IP cameras, which is such a huge impact.
Gives you an eye into that company, right? That organization. And
an eye and the ability to control it. You are not
right.
only able to espionage and leak data, you are also able to alter data. I think one of the things I wanted to do in this research is like a James Bond hacking an IP camera and replaying an old video.
Send somebody in, but then cut out that video so that they've disappeared.
Yeah,
from
basically a secret agent.
Ocean 11 type
exactly.
thing.
And I do believe like this is completely doable by polling a centralized cell.
Yeah. So this custom protocol, how common is it that a hardware vendor will have their own protocol for their client-server interactions?
In the world of industrial controls, this is super common. If you're looking at the main vendors, and essentially every vendor in that landscape, you see them implementing a proprietary protocol, undocumented, and like it's super close source that is used to communicate between their products. So it is very common. We do see it a lot. And essentially, this closed-out system enables researchers to try and dissect and understand and analyze the protocol, and in the process uncover vulnerabilities that could affect a wide range of devices in that line of work that use this.
Is the use of custom proprietary protocols because of the demands of these deployments, or do you think it's a security through obscurity type play where if we have our own protocol and we don't document it, then people aren't going to be able to hack it because they don't know how it works?
So it's a bit of both. And in addition to that, simply every vendor trying to build their own ecosystem, essentially not only locking
walled garden.
Exactly. Yeah. And you want to be able to control everything that talks to your devices. And the easiest way is to build your own protocol. And we do see a lot of these protocols being used, these proprietary protocols. And personally, like this is one of my favorite things to do is analyzing, uncovering, unwrapping, having good understanding of these proprietary protocols.
So literally for this protocol, there was no documentation. There's nothing you could refer to.
Yeah. And in addition to that, the entire protocol was fully encrypted using MTLS, meaning essentially you had no easy way of knowing what's going on under the hood. Without actually researching the protocol, you would never know what's going on under the hood and what kind of messages are being sent to the client and the cell. And this was exactly the starting point of my research. I wanted to be able to see, sniff, and see clear text packets of the access remoting protocol. At this point, I didn't know its name even of the access
remoting. As a security researcher, when you see them encrypting that protocol and using a custom protocol, in your mind, is that, ooh, I bet there are some interesting things going on there? Or does it like...
So it's obviously better than not encrypting anything at all, especially because this protocol is supposed to be used over different networks, essentially bridging two networks. And because of that, it was essential to use encryption. But many times people hear encryption and see security. And this couldn't be farther than the truth, because encrypting a protocol does not make it secure. And
as you showed in your research.
Yeah, of course. And just because the protocol uses encryption does not mean it is secure. It might make the researching the protocol a bit harder. And I do believe this is one of the reasons why these vulnerabilities went uncovered for so many years, because the access remoting protocol is not new at all. It was used on in-access devices for years and years. And only now we were able, like the security community were able to uncover it. And the reason for that was A, the protocol is fully encrypted, so no one had no one was able to glimpse into the protocol. And B, it was a lot of researching this proprietary protocol. And this was one of the reasons why it went uncovered.
Talk about the vulnerabilities that you were basically able, just for the listeners, you basically set up a man-in-the-middle attack to intercept the communications between the server and the access cameras and decrypt them and analyze the communications. Talk about what you found when you did that.
Essentially, the access remoting is an RPC, remote procedure protocol. It enables the client to invoke some kind of functionality on the server. Let's say, for example, you want to log in, then you invoke the logon async function. Or if you want to list cameras, you can invoke that specific function that handles it. The problem is when more complicated types are needed for different functionality. The entire application was written in native .NET. It's not browser-based. And the entire RPC was using serialization to basically send serialized object over the wire. And when we're talking about primitives like strings, integers, stuff of that sort, that's no problem at all. I can send you a string or an integer and nothing will happen.
Right.
But sometimes more complicated types should be used, which are classes. And this introduces the process of serialization and deserialization, essentially taking an in-memory class in the server or the client and transform it to a byte representation, either strings or bytes.
Object.
And that way I'm able to pass along classes between different processes, different computers over the wire, you name it. And in .NET, this could be, and in general even, this is serious security concern. Because if it enables the client to decide what kind of classes will be created on the server's backend, it could lead to unexpected results, side effects, and many times to code execution. Exactly. You essentially create your own class U control on the server, not something the server intended to actually have. And this was the first vulnerability we found, the deserialization vulnerability in the access remoting protocol. Now, this in .NET enables immediate code execution once you know how to communicate with the protocol. And then we developed two approaches to full exploitation. The first one is via man-in-the-middle, which is limited because it requires user interaction, it requires the man-in-the-middle setup. And the second one is full pre-auth, no prior knowledge, no credentials. All you need to do is to be able to connect to a server and you are able to fully execute code on the server's backend.
And would these servers be publicly accessible generally?
So when we're talking about IP cameras for organizations, we're not talking about 1, 2, 3 cameras. Big organizations have hundreds, thousands, or like many different physical sites. And somehow you need to connect them remotely and you want to be able to monitor, view, consume the feed, see that everything is okay remotely. And for that, you need to have remote access. And because of that, and because the access remoting protocol is fully encrypted, fully authenticated, many users do expose it to the internet. And I mean, it's stated by Access. You want to have remote access.
It's like a VPN server.
Exactly. VPN server requires authentication. This is fully encrypted. That's why we allow ourselves to expose it to the internet. And because of that, we see many servers. And once again, this is like a server manages thousands of cameras. So it's not only one device. It could basically compromise an entire company. And we see thousands of different servers exposed online, mostly in Western countries, mostly in the US.
So you discovered these vulnerabilities, obviously you reported them to Access. Access has issued patches for them. How would an attack play out?
So the only thing that's needed by an attacker is to be able to access the port, the communication port for the access remoting, which should be forwarded in the firewall if you want to expose this service. So in order to exploit that attack, we discovered like you need to chain a few different vulnerabilities. The core one is the deserialization vulnerabilities that once you are able to send access remoting packets, you are able to cause the deserialization and execute code on the server's end. The issue was for us as researchers that in order to communicate in access remoting, you need to pass an NTLM SSP challenge response, essentially requiring full authentication to start communicating with a server. This meant that the vulnerability could not be exploited pre-auth, and instead you need to have valid credentials on the server's host. Now, we managed to bypass this requirement by exploiting vulnerabilities in a fallback port. Essentially, if the main port is inaccessible to the client, they use a different port which uses a little bit of a different protocol. This protocol is implemented not via MTLS, but instead over, once again, very proprietary protocol over HTTP, which is
Access protocol.
But however, behind the scenes, it uses the same access remoting primitives. And it is also susceptible to the same vulnerability. And in this fallback protocol, we managed to find like an alternate path that enabled us to bypass the authentication requirement, allowing us to start speaking in access remoting and exploit the cell. So to answer your question, all an attacker going to do is to use this protocol to know how to start talking with the server, use the alternate path, begin the entire handshake, which is a complicated process. You can read more about it in the blog or the slides. And then once you're able to send access packets, access remoting packets, you can send a malicious packet to the server.
So you can take over the control server, and then also, as I understand it, the client software as well, which is used more for individual users to be able to access streams on the camera.
So if we're talking about the first attack scenario we imposed of man in the middle, because both the client and the server use the same libraries for the access remoting protocol stack, they are both susceptible to the dissolution vulnerability. Meaning, if you man in the middle of the connection, you are able to attack the server, and you're able to also attack the client, essentially attacking both ends. And to make matters worse, once you control the server, you are able to use legitimate features in order to actually exploit the cameras it manages.
Off the LAN.
Exactly.
Sure. Right.
At the end of the day, Axis supports something that's called packages. It enables its administrators to modify the behavior of the cameras. And you are able to build, either get Axis approved packages, community built one, or build your own using the Axis SDK. So once you control the server, the management server, you are able to infect all the cameras it manages with a malicious package, gaining full control over them as well. So you're able to exploit the client, the server, and all the cameras.
And in your experience with organizations that have access cameras or something like them deployed, are they looking for are they monitoring traffic between the control servers and the cameras to look for, oh, hey, that's a package, like we don't recognize that package?
So it is a legitimate traffic at the end of it. The difference between adding a package and, let's say, changing a configuration or even doing a backup is very minor. At the end of the day, the only difference is with the API that you use in the HTTP web request to the camera.
Hard to monitor.
Very hard to monitor. You need to be very fine-grained, very knowledgeable of the Axis ecosystem, and I do not believe when organizations monitor it. In addition to that, because Axis cameras are IP cameras, IoT devices, there's obviously almost all cases, no antivirus or anything that enables you to actually log the camera itself.
They're resource constrained,
Low-level devices using Axis OS, Linux-based, but still very limited.
We think about cameras, obviously they allow surveillance of an organization. That's very valuable for let's say, a state-sponsored actor. But with KV botnet and others, we realize also that they could be used potentially for other types of password spraying attacks or enrolled in botnets and so on.
And also deploying ransomware. An attacker could use the camera as a pivot point into different networks and different segments of them.
What's your say? Do most organizations have the IP camera kind of air gap from the rest of their network?
So it really depends. If you're talking like a BMS device, like building management, it might be in the entire BMS LAN, and that way it exposes additional resources for attackers to take over. It really goes like case by case.
Reading your research and understanding the sort of, it seems like the access control server and infrastructure really is reliant on like Active Directory and kind of Windows infrastructure.
Exactly. It is a Windows machine. It is a software-based server that is using Windows .NET application. At the end of the day, it's a Windows server. That's all it is. So it could be located in your server's VLAN. The cameras could be located in in many VLANs, because at the end of the day, you have thousands of cameras, different physical locations, different offices, layers, floors, you name it.
Okay. Here are the tough questions. What was the response of Access when you contacted them about these? And what should we understand? So they've issued patches for these vulnerabilities, but for most of their customers, is it clear that they will have applied the patches, or is it possible that many of these systems will continue to go unpatched?
So let me start by talking about the disclosure process. We've contacted Access directly, and they were super responsive, and it was a great responsible disclosure process. I've disclosed vulnerabilities to probably 100 brands over the last 5 years, and Access was one of the better ones.
Had a clear portal.
Had a clear endpoint, contact information, and more importantly, super responsive super proactive, making sure their devices are protected. And I can tell you that after we gave them our report, it took between a few weeks and a few months. It depends on the specific vulnerability because some were tougher to solve, but they made patches as soon as possible and pushed their clients to update it.
Does Access have a bug bounty program?
They do.
They do.
They do.
Did you get a bounty?
We do not. We do it pro bono. The service we sell, we do the entire vulnerability research as an open source, fully free of charge, with the goal of helping improve security.
Okay. So these are like auto update type functionality?
So it's not auto update, but it does pop up like, hey, there's a major security update, please update. And because it's a Windows server and it's not like an industrial environment, it is easier for users to update. Kudos and credit when credit is due. Super responsible. At the end of the day, there's almost no device software product that has no vulnerabilities. The only question is how much time, which translates to money, you put in as a researcher. So I do believe that everything has vulnerabilities in it. And me personally, when I look for brands, I look for brands that researchers already took a look at, because it means they cover their bases. So when it's not a black mark on their yard and they were super professional into fixing them. In regards to patching, then yeah, it is not like industrial low-level device. It's a Windows server that enables you to automatically update it. So we do believe that all customers had a few months to patch. We do not talk about the technical details before giving the customers enough time to patch. And we do urge them, us and Access, to patch and make sure they are more protected.
Should we be concerned that it took you to find this vulnerability in their custom protocol that's been in their product for many years, that they weren't doing the type of research you're doing internally to find it themselves?
So not necessarily, because at the end of the day, like I've said, everything has vulnerabilities.
Yes.
And even after I've taken a look at it, I'm sure another researcher can put in the time and find more vulnerabilities. And when talking about security matureness, I believe the best practice is how companies actually handle responsible disclosure from the community. Because no matter how much time, effort, money, like dedicated people they put in place to make sure that their devices are protected, still the security research community, which I do believe is a great community, will have findings. And the best way, and we do see like in general, the entire industry adopting it, is to have responsible disclosure policies, endpoints, portals,
front door
contacts, and have a way for a security researcher to contact and responsibly disclose vulnerabilities. And I can tell you that 5 years ago it was very rare, and we almost saw none of the companies using it, we now see more and more companies using it, having a dedicated team that handles these reports. And I do think this is the right direction, and we do see the community moving.
When you read your research report, some of the concerns are, it seems like the infrastructure of these camera networks is a little bit loose, like self-signed certificates, and it was very easy for you to construct a man-in-the-middle attack that presumably a malicious actor could construct as well, and so on. Do you think Access and other IP camera makers need to take a harder look at closing down some of those open doors for malicious actors? So maybe stop using self-signed certificates, make man-in-the-middle attacks harder to carry out?
Exactly. So I think the community is moving in that direction, and we see more and more companies implementing full-on PKIs, enabling users to stay fully protected and to actually be able to trust all the moving parts in the networks. We see it even in industrial devices that are now beginning to implement full PKIs. And I do believe this is the correct way to approach things. There is fallback, like from a usability's point of view. It makes it harder for a user to easily jump in and configure a new camera. But I do believe it's needed and worth the hassle for a user.
Okay, final question is for the many organizations that are using IP cameras to monitor their facilities and so on. They're not going to be able to hire somebody like you to come in and pen test the system. What might they do to limit their exposure or the risk of vulnerability like this?
So I think it's twofold. First, you need to understand the risk. If you expose a server, expose a service, expose anything to the internet, you put risk on yourself. And when you understand the risk, you are able to take a secure assessment and be able to mitigate it as much as possible. If it means using a VPN or even saying, yeah, I do understand that I'm putting this specific Windows machine at risk, and I'll do my best to limit it in case it gets exploited. So the first thing is understanding the risk and working to mitigate and reduce it as much as possible. The second thing is having proper network hygiene and segmentation. If a device, if a server, device, IP camera does get exploited and does get remote code execution by a threat actor, we need to be able to close it as much as possible, be able to know what kind of access it has in the network and have it least privileged kind of access. And of course, has visibility in network traffic analysis and to be able to understand what is happening in our networks. We need to essentially turn this underbelly blind spot into the spotlight and to be able to understand what's going on.
Really good, really, really interesting research.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and talking
Thank you.
on Security Ledger Podcast.
Thank you.